The champagne at their fifth anniversary dinner was perfectly chilled, reflecting the Manhattan skyline, but the reflection in the window betrayed her, her fingers flying across a screen, smiling at a message that wasn't for him. It was the moment the silence shifted from peaceful to suffocating, the precise second before a carefully curated life shattered into jagged pieces. If you want to witness the wreckage behind the perfectly polished glass and the cold road to redemption, stay with me. The sound of a zipper closing usually implied finality, but in the stale air of their Lincoln Park apartment, it sounded like a jagged tear through fabric. Ethan Vance sat on the edge of the beige sofa, a piece of furniture they had picked out together 3 years ago because Elena said it looked sensible. His hands were clasped between his knees, fingers interlaced so tightly the knuckles were white. He wasn't looking at the woman packing the Louis Vuitton duffel bag near the door. He was looking at the rain streaking against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Chicago was gray, blending perfectly with the static noise in his head. "You're not going to say anything?" Elena asked. Her voice wasn't sad. It was tight, impatient. The voice of someone who had rehearsed this speech in front of a mirror and was annoyed the audience wasn't reacting on cue. Ethan finally looked up. Elena was beautiful, in that sharp, curated way that required high maintenance and higher validation. She was wearing the silk blouse he had bought her for her birthday, the one that cost half his paycheck. She was checking her phone again. "What is there to say, Elena?" Ethan's voice was steady, surprisingly calm even to his own ears. "You packed the bag before you told me. The conversation ended before it started." Elena sighed, dropping her phone into her purse. She walked over, her heels clicking on the hardwood, a sharp staccato rhythm that used to signal her arrival home, but now sounded like a countdown. "Don't play the victim, Ethan. We both know this has been dead for a year. You're content. You're happy drawing blueprints for strip malls in the suburbs. You're happy with enough." "I'm a senior draftsman," Ethan corrected gently, "and we have a home. We have a life. We have a mortgage and a routine," she snapped, her mask slipping. "I want a life, Ethan. A real one. Julian doesn't just look at the skyline. He owns the buildings. He offers me the world, while you offer me safety." Julian. Ethan knew the name. Julian Thorne. He was a fixture in the society pages, a venture capitalist with a smile that looked too wide and eyes that looked too empty. Ethan had seen him at the company gala 2 weeks ago, his hand lingering too long on Elena's lower back while Ethan was getting drinks. "He's rich, Elena," Ethan said, standing up. "That's what you mean. He's rich." "He's ambitious," she corrected, her chin tilting up defensively. "He creates things. You just follow instructions. I can't be with a man who is okay with being invisible." A car horn honked from the street below, a heavy, insistent sound. A black town car, no doubt. Elena grabbed the handle of her bag. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, perhaps waiting for him to beg, to scream, to throw a vase against the wall. She wanted the drama. She wanted the validation that she was worth destroying a man over. But Ethan didn't move. He felt a strange numbness spreading through his chest, a cold cauterization of the wound. He realized with sudden clarity that he didn't know this woman at all. The woman he loved was a projection, an idea that had evaporated the moment she compared his worth to another man's bank account. "Goodbye, Ethan," she said, turning toward the door. "I left the keys on the counter. Don't worry about the lease. Julian's lawyers will handle my half." "You don't need to worry about the lease," Ethan said. She paused, hand on the doorknob. "What?" "Just go," he whispered. She didn't look back. The door clicked shut. The lock engaged automatically. Ethan stood alone in the silence. The apartment felt instantly larger and terrifyingly empty. He walked to the window and looked down. He saw her figure emerge from the building, sheltered by an umbrella held by a driver. She slid into the back of a sleek black Mercedes. He watched the taillights fade into the rainy Chicago traffic until they were indistinguishable from the thousands of other red lights bleeding into the wet asphalt. He walked to the kitchen counter. The keys were there, sitting next to a half-empty cup of coffee. He picked them up, feeling the cold metal bite into his palm. Invisible, he murmured to the empty room. He walked to the bedroom, pulled his own battered suitcase from the closet, and began to pack. He didn't take much, just clothes, his laptop, and his sketch pad. He left the wedding photos on the wall. He left the furniture. He left the sensible life. If she wanted him to be invisible, he would grant her wish. He would disappear so completely, she would question if he ever existed at all. The Motel 6 near O'Hare Airport smelled of stale cigarette smoke and industrial cleaner. It was the kind of place people went to be forgotten, which suited Ethan perfectly. He sat at the small laminate desk, the glow of his laptop screen illuminating his face in the dark room. Outside, the roar of jet engines overhead was a constant, rhythmic reminder of escape. It was 3:00 a.m. He hadn't slept. On the bed lay the contents of his life: 3 tailored suits, a sketchbook, his passport, and his wedding ring. Ethan picked up the ring. It was a simple platinum band. He remembered the day he bought it. The nervous sweat on his palms. The belief that this circle of metal was a shield against the world. Now, it felt heavy, like a shackle. He didn't throw it across the room in a fit of rage. That would have been theatrical, something Elena would have done. Instead, he walked to the bathroom sink, dropped the ring down the drain, and turned on the tap. He watched the water swirl, carrying the metal down into the dark piping without a sound. He returned to the desk and opened a new browser tab. His bank accounts were already liquidated, the funds transferred to an offshore account he had set up hours ago. It wasn't a fortune. Elena was right about that. But it was enough to start over, enough to survive while he built something else. He typed in a search query: Singapore, emerging markets, architectural development. He didn't choose Singapore for its beauty or its food. He chose it because it was 9,000 miles away from Chicago. He chose it because it was a city of steel and glass, a place that valued efficiency and results over social pedigree. He booked the ticket, one way, departing at 6:45 a.m. Next was the phone. It was buzzing incessantly. Texts from his mother asking if they were coming for Sunday dinner. A message from a colleague about the blueprints for the simplistic mall project. And one notification from Instagram. Elena had posted a story. Against his better judgment, he clicked it. It was a photo of 2 glasses of champagne against the blurred backdrop of a penthouse view. No faces, just the implication of intimacy. The caption read, "Finally, a view that matches the vision." Ethan stared at the image. He didn't feel the sharp stab of jealousy he expected. Instead, he felt a cold, calcifying sensation in his chest. The Ethan who drew safe blueprints for safe buildings was dead. Elena had killed him. The man sitting in this motel room was something else entirely. A blank slate designed for utility and endurance. He powered down the phone. He popped the SIM card tray open with a bent paperclip. He took the small chip between his thumb and forefinger and snapped it in half. He tossed the pieces into the trash can next to the desk. At 5:00 a.m., Ethan walked out of the motel room. The rain had stopped, leaving the parking lot slick and reflective under the harsh sodium lights. He threw his suitcase into the back of a waiting cab. "Which terminal?" the driver asked, eyeing Ethan in the rearview mirror. Ethan looked tired, his eyes shadowed, but his jaw was set with a tension that suggested he was ready for war. "International," Ethan said. He didn't look back at the city skyline visible in the distance. As the taxi merged onto the highway, Ethan Vance closed his eyes. When he opened them again, Chicago would just be a memory, and he would be a ghost. 5 years could erode a canyon, and as Elena stood in the break room of Sterling & Co., staring at the sludge in the bottom of the coffee pot, she felt eroded too. The office, located on the 12th floor of a building that had been fashionable in the 90s, smelled faintly of toner and desperation. This wasn't the world Julian Thorne had promised her. It wasn't the penthouse life, the private jets, or the endless summer in the Hamptons. That life had lasted exactly 18 months, long enough for Julian to burn through a round of venture capital, grow bored of her questions about their future, and trade her in for a 23-year-old model who didn't ask about his liquidity issues. Now, Elena was 34, single, and the vice president of communications for a commercial real estate firm that hadn't closed a major deal in 3 quarters. She walked back to her office, the heels of her shoes sinking slightly into the worn carpet. Her office had a window, but the view was blocked by the construction of a newer, taller skyscraper across the street. It stood there like a taunt, a monolith of blue glass reflecting the sun she couldn't see. Her phone buzzed on the desk. A notification from her bank. Balance alert. She swiped it away instantly. She was still paying off the debts from the Julian era, the leases she had signed in her own name, the credit cards he had maxed out and promised to pay. Elena? She looked up. It was Marcus, the sweaty, frantic director of sales. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. "Have you heard?" Marcus whispered, leaning into her doorway, checking the hall behind him. "The board meeting just ended." "Is it bankruptcy?" Elena asked, her stomach tightening. She had updated her resume 3 times this week, but the market was cold. "Worse! Acquisition. Hostile," Marcus said, his eyes wide. "We've been bought out. Lock, stock, and barrel. Sterling is gone as of this morning." Elena stood up, smoothing the front of her skirt. "Bought by who? We're hemorrhaging money. Who would want this carcass?" "A conglomerate out of Singapore. Aura Holdings," Marcus said, the name like it was a disease. "Tech money. Smart city development. They've been eating up mid-tier firms all over the Pacific Rim. This is their first foothold in Chicago." Elena frowned. She had heard whispers of Aura in the trade journals. They were known for being efficient, brutal, and utterly unsentimental. They didn't buy companies to save them. They bought them to strip them for parts or completely rebuild them. "So layoffs," Elena stated flatly. "Restructuring," Marcus corrected, though the distinction was meaningless. "The memo just went out. The existing C-suite is out. The transition team lands tomorrow. And get this, the CEO of Aura is coming personally to oversee the integration. That never happens. He usually sends a hatchet man." Elena walked to the window, staring at the steel skeleton of the building across the street. She felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the office air conditioning. "Do we have a name?" she asked. "No name on the memo, just the office of the CEO. But the rumors are he's an American expatriate, a ghost. No interviews, no photos, just results." Elena felt a headache blooming behind her eyes. She needed this job. She needed the salary to keep the facade of her life from collapsing entirely. She couldn't afford to be restructured out of existence. "We have to prepare a presentation," Elena said, her voice snapping into professional mode, a defense mechanism she had perfected. "If the CEO is coming, we need to justify our existence. Get the portfolio ready, Marcus. I want to show him that Sterling has value." Marcus nodded and scurried away, leaving Elena alone in the gray light of her office. She looked at her reflection in the darkened computer monitor. She looked tired. The sharpness was still there, but the edges were frayed. She wondered, briefly, what Ethan was doing. She hadn't heard a whisper of him in 5 years. He was probably still in some basement somewhere, drawing lines for someone else's dream. She pushed the thought away. She didn't have the luxury of the past. She had a mysterious CEO to impress tomorrow, a man who held her precarious future in his hands. She sat down and began to type, unaware that she was drafting a defense for a judge who had already passed the verdict. The boardroom at Sterling & Co. was designed to intimidate, with its long mahogany table and panoramic view of the Chicago Loop. But today, the room itself felt terrified. The air conditioning was humming too loudly, filling the silence where 12 executives sat waiting. Elena sat near the end of the table, her hands folded over a leather portfolio. She had spent the last 24 hours memorizing engagement metrics and crisis management strategies. She was ready to sell herself to the new overlords. She checked her watch. 9 o'clock a.m. sharp. The double doors at the far end of the room didn't just open, they swung wide with synchronized precision. 2 assistants entered first, young, impeccably dressed, carrying tablets. They didn't look at the people at the table. They simply took positions by the head chair, setting down a bottle of water and a single, slim file. Then, the CEO walked in. He moved with a fluid, predatory grace that the old floorboards of the Sterling office weren't used to. He wore a charcoal suit that was tailored within an inch of its life, the kind of cut that whispered of Singaporean bespoke tailors and Italian fabric. He didn't look at the room. He looked at the file on the table as he sat down. Elena felt the blood drain from her face so fast it made her dizzy. The room tilted. It was the jawline, sharper now, hidden beneath a shadow of meticulously groomed stubble. It was the hands, no longer stained with graphite or ink, but resting with calm, terrifying authority on the mahogany. It was Ethan. But it wasn't her Ethan. The man she had left was soft edges and warm sweaters. This man was made of steel and ice. He didn't look like he drew buildings anymore. He looked like he evicted people from them. A collective shuffle of discomfort went through the room as the executives waited for an introduction. Ethan didn't give one. He didn't smile. He didn't offer the obligatory, "glad to be here." "This company," Ethan began, his voice deeper than she remembered, stripped of any Midwestern politeness, "is a masterclass in inefficiency." He looked up, scanning the faces at the table. His eyes were dark, unreadable. When his gaze swept over Elena, her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She waited for the flicker of recognition, the shock, the anger, the pain. She waited for him to pause. He didn't. His eyes slid past her as if she were a potted plant in the corner. He looked at the finance director instead. "Your overhead is 40% above industry standard. You're leasing space you don't use and employing staff you don't need." Ethan tapped the file. "I've reviewed the personnel audits. Effective immediately, Aura Holdings is assuming direct control of all operations. We aren't here to partner with you. We are here to salvage the assets and discard the liabilities." Elena's throat was dry. She needed to speak. She was the VP of Communications. It was her job to manage the message. But her voice was trapped under 5 years of guilt and shock. Sir, the COO stammered, "we have a legacy here in Chicago." "You have debt," Ethan cut him off, "and nostalgia doesn't pay the creditors." Finally, Ethan turned his attention to her end of the table. "Communications," he said. It wasn't a question. Elena forced herself to stand. Her legs felt like lead. "Yes, I have the quarterly reports prepared regarding our brand positioning and—" "Sit down," Ethan said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The command was absolute. Elena froze, half standing, humiliated. "I have read your reports," Ethan continued, still not making direct eye contact, looking instead at the tablet an assistant held out to him. "They are optimistic fiction. You're spinning a narrative for a company that died 2 years ago. Aura doesn't need spin. We need metrics." He finally looked at her, really looked at her. For 1 second, Elena saw the brown eyes she used to wake up to. She searched for a spark of the husband who had once made her coffee every morning. "We will be reviewing the necessity of the entire PR department by Friday," Ethan said, his face a mask of professional boredom. "Until then, do not speak to the press. Do not issue statements. You are on a probationary hold." He turned away, dismissing her existence with a turn of his shoulder. Next item. Logistics. Elena sank back into her chair. Her hands were trembling beneath the table. He hadn't screamed. He hadn't demanded to know why she left. He had done something far worse. He had looked right at her and seen absolutely nothing of value. The office of Sterling & Co. had transformed into a sterile operating theater. Over the last 48 hours, the transition team from Aura Holdings had moved through the departments like a swarm of locusts, stripping away redundancy. The sound of laughter and coffee break gossip had been replaced by the low, ominous hum of paper shredders and the soft click of severance folders closing. Elena sat at her desk, the glass walls of her office offering no protection from the carnage. She watched as Marcus, the sales director who had been with the company for a decade, was escorted out by security. He held a cardboard box, his face gray and slack. She was next. She knew it. Her department was non-essential overhead in Ethan's New World Order. She needed to speak to him, not the CEO, the man. She tracked his movements through the internal company calendar, a habit she hadn't broken since they were married, though back then it was to know when to have dinner ready. Now, it was to ambush him. He was scheduled for a site inspection of the lower levels at 2 p.m. At 1:55 p.m., Elena stood by the executive elevators. Her heart was beating a frantic rhythm against her silk blouse. She rehearsed her opening lines. "I'm sorry. I was young and stupid. Can we just talk?" They all sounded pathetic in her head. The elevator chimed. The doors slid open. Ethan was there. He was alone, staring at a tablet in his hand. Elena stepped in before she could lose her nerve. She pressed the button for the lobby, ensuring they had 20 floors of descent. The doors closed, sealing them in a box of brushed steel and mirrors. The silence was absolute. It pressed against her ears. Ethan didn't look up. He swiped a finger across the screen, highlighting a row of data. "Ethan," she whispered. The name felt foreign on her tongue after 5 years. He didn't flinch. "Ms. Vance," he replied, his eyes never leaving the screen. "If this is regarding the PR audit, you can submit your rebuttal to HR by close of business." "It's not about the audit," she said, her voice trembling slightly. She turned to face him, desperate for him to look at her. "It's about us. You can't pretend I'm not standing here. You can't pretend you didn't pack a bag and vanish because of me." Finally, he lowered the tablet. He turned his head slowly. His expression wasn't angry. It was mildly fatigued, like a man dealing with a tedious supply chain issue. "I didn't vanish because of you, Elena," he said calmly. "I left because my trajectory here had reached its ceiling. You simply accelerated the timeline." "I hurt you," she insisted, needing him to admit the pain. If he admitted the pain, there was still a connection. "I destroyed our marriage. I know that. I live with that every day. But this, coming back here, buying this company, is this revenge? Because if you want to fire me, just do it. Don't torture me with this Cold War." Ethan blinked. A small, dry chuckle escaped his lips, but it had no humor in it. "You overestimate your footprint in my life," he said softly. "I bought Sterling because the asset valuation was undervalued by 30%, and the location serves Aura's North American expansion strategy. You are a line item, Elena. A legacy employee with a bloated salary and declining performance metrics." The elevator passed the 10th floor. The numbers counted down in red LEDs. "So I mean nothing?" she asked, tears stinging her eyes. 5 years of marriage, the house, the life, it's just Deleted? Ethan turned back to the doors as they chimed for the lobby. You deleted it the night you got into Julian Thorne's car, he said. I just reformatted the drive. The doors opened. The bustling noise of the lobby rushed in, breaking the suffocating intimacy of the elevator. Ethan stepped out. He didn't look back. Have that report on my desk by Friday, he threw over his shoulder, his voice merging with the noise of the city. Or don't. It won't change the outcome. Elena stood alone in the open elevator, the cold air from the lobby hitting her flushed face. She realized then that hate would have been better. Hate was a fire you could fight. But this was a void, and she was falling into it. The schedule on the conference room monitor read, 10 a.m., Thorne Capital, external investment proposal. Elena stared at the screen, her fingers gripping the edge of the glass table until her knuckles turned white. Fate, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. She was only in the room because the transition team required a recording secretary for all external pitches, a humiliating demotion from her VP status, but she had taken it to stay employed. Now, she was trapped. The doors opened. Julian Thorne walked in. He was wearing a suit that cost more than most cars, a midnight blue fabric that caught the light, but up close, the illusion wavered. His tan was too orange, the result of a spray booth rather than the Riviera. His smile was too wide, showing teeth that had been veneered into an unnatural brightness, and there was a sheen of sweat on his upper lip, despite the cool air of the office. He didn't notice Elena at first. His eyes were locked on the man at the head of the table. Mr. Vance, Julian said, extending a hand with practiced confidence. Incredible to finally meet the man behind the curtain. I've heard Aura is making big moves. Ethan didn't stand. He didn't take the hand. He simply gestured to the empty chair opposite him. Sit down, Mr. Thorne. We have 20 minutes. Julian's smile faltered for a microsecond, a glitch in the programming, before he smoothed his jacket and sat. He opened his portfolio. Finally, he glanced to the side and saw Elena. He paused. Recognition flickered in his eyes, followed immediately by a dismissal. There was no warmth, no nostalgia, not even a nod to the 18 months they had spent burning through his trust fund. She was just a piece of furniture from a past life he had already discarded. Right, Julian said, turning back to Ethan, the money. I'll get straight to it. Thorne Capital is developing a mixed-use complex in the West Loop. Luxury residential, high-end retail. We call it the Spire. It's going to redefine the skyline. We're looking for a strategic partner to bridge the final funding round. Julian tapped his tablet, and a rendering appeared on the main screen. It was flashy, sleek, and impossibly tall. Ethan studied the image. He didn't look impressed. He looked like a structural engineer inspecting a crack in the foundation. The Spire, Ethan repeated flatly. I've seen the prospectus. You're projecting a 40% ROI within 2 years. Conservative estimates, Julian beamed. The market is hungry for this level of opacity and exclusivity. The market is hungry for stability, Ethan corrected. He picked up a stylus and tapped the table, a rhythmic, intimidating sound. I ran a background check on your land acquisition, Julian. You don't own the title. You're leasing the ground rights on a balloon payment structure. And your primary contractor is currently being sued for using substandard steel in 3 other projects. The room went deadly silent. Julian's smile vanished. He shifted in his chair. Those are administrative details. You're in the process of bankruptcy, Ethan said. His voice was devoid of anger. It was just cold, hard data. You're over-leveraged on 4 different properties. You're here because no bank in Chicago will touch you. You want Aura to underwrite your debt so you can cash out before the structure collapses. Elena watched, mesmerized. She remembered how Julian used to mock Ethan at dinner parties, calling him boring and small-time. Now the small-time draftsman was dissecting the venture capitalist with the precision of a surgeon. "Look, Vance," Julian's voice rose, losing its polished veneer. "You don't understand how this city works. It's about vision. It's about connections. It's about gravity," Ethan said, "and gravity always wins." Ethan closed the folder in front of him. "Aura passes, and I suggest you liquidate your personal assets before the SEC looks closer at your investor disclosures." Julian stood up, his face flushed a mottled red. He looked at Ethan, then at Elena. He sneered. "I see what this is. You're still sore about the wife? Is that it? You think because you got the corner office, you can lecture me?" Elena held her breath. Ethan looked at Julian with genuine confusion. "This has nothing to do with her, Julian. You're just a bad investment." He pressed the intercom button. "Security, please escort Mr. Thorne out." Julian grabbed his portfolio and stormed out, a whirlwind of expensive cologne and failure. The door clicked shut. Ethan didn't look at Elena. He pulled the next file toward him. "Next meeting is in 10 minutes, he said to the empty room. Elena stared at the closed door, then at the man working calmly at the head of the table. The rich guy she had destroyed her life for was a fraud. The boring husband she had left was the most powerful man in the city. And the tragedy wasn't that Ethan hated her. It was that he had become so great, she no longer even registered as a variable in his equation. The city lights of Chicago usually looked like jewels from the 12th floor. But tonight, through the rain-slicked glass of the executive suite, they looked like blurred wounds. It was 10:15 p.m. The cleaning crew had already come and gone, the vacuum tracks on the carpet the only evidence of their passing. The main floor was dark, save for the green glow of exit signs and the strip of light spilling from under the double doors of the CEO's office. Elena stood outside those doors. She had been standing there for 10 minutes. She shouldn't be here. She should be at home in her studio apartment, calculating how many months of rent she had left in savings. But she couldn't leave. The humiliation of the morning meeting, the surgical dismantling of Julian, the way Ethan looked through her like she was made of glass. It was a pressure building behind her ribs that demanded release. She pushed the door open without knocking. Ethan was there, jacket off, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, reviewing a blueprint spread across the desk. He held a red marker, making aggressive slashes through sections of the design. He didn't look up when she entered. He didn't jump. "The server migration is scheduled for midnight," he said, assuming she was a technician or an assistant. "We need the bandwidth clear." "It's not the server," Elena said. Her voice was louder than she intended, bouncing off the minimalist walls. Ethan stopped writing. He capped the marker with a slow, deliberate click. He looked up, his face illuminated by the harsh white light of his desk lamp. There were dark circles under his eyes. He looked tired, human, but still terrifyingly distant. "Go home, Elena," he said quietly. "Your department review isn't until Friday. You're not being terminated tonight." "Stop it!" she snapped, walking further into the room until she was standing directly across from him. "Stop treating me like an employee. Stop acting like we're strangers." "We are strangers," Ethan replied. "The people who were married 5 years ago don't exist anymore." "You did this on purpose," she accused, her voice shaking with a mix of rage and grief. "Don't lie to me, Ethan. You bought this company. You came back to Chicago. You humiliated Julian. You're doing all of this just to punish me. You wanted to show me what I threw away. You wanted to see me beg." She slammed her hand on the desk, right on top of the blueprints. "Admit it. Tell me you hate me. Tell me you're doing this because I broke your heart. Just feel something." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the hum of the hard drives and the rain against the window. Elena was breathing hard, tears finally spilling over. She wanted his anger. She wanted him to scream that she had ruined his life, because if he screamed, it meant she still mattered. Ethan sighed.
It was a long, weary sound. He stood up and walked to the window, turning his back to her. "I don't hate you, Elena," he said to the glass. "Hate takes energy. Hate is an investment. I don't have the time for
it." He turned back to face her, his expression perfectly calm. "I didn't buy Sterling to hurt you. I bought it because the logistics chain was compatible with Aura's Midwest expansion. When my team brought me the list of acquisition targets, I didn't even look at the personnel files. I didn't know you still worked here until I signed the final deed." Elena felt the floor drop out from under her. You didn't know?" "No," Ethan said. "I didn't check, because I didn't care." The words hit her harder than a slap. "You didn't care?" "Elena," he said, walking back to the desk and leaning against it, crossing his arms. "When I left that motel room 5 years ago, I made a choice. I could spend my life trying to prove you wrong, or I could build a life where you simply didn't factor in. I chose the latter. You were the catalyst, yes. You pushed me off the cliff, but I learned to fly on the way down, and I forgot about the person who pushed me a long time ago." He looked at her with a pity that was far worse than the anger she had craved. "Julian is a fraud because he never did the work. You are unhappy because you chased a mirage. I am here because I built this reality, brick by brick. None of this is about you. It never was." He sat back down and uncapped his marker. "You can keep your job if you perform, Elena, or you can quit. It makes no difference to the bottom line." He looked back down at the blueprints, dismissing her not with cruelty, but with the absolute crushing weight of his indifference. Elena stood there for a long moment, the truth settling in her bones like ice. She wasn't the villain of his story. She wasn't the tragedy. She was just a footnote he had already skimmed past. She turned and walked out of the office, closing the door softly behind her, leaving him to the only thing he truly loved now, his empire. Friday arrived with a biting wind off Lake Michigan, rattling the windows of Sterling and Kodo. The transition was complete. The Aura Holdings logo had already replaced the old brass plaque in the lobby, and the office hummed with the terrifying efficiency of the new regime. Elena was summoned to the CEO's office at 11 o'clock a.m. She didn't bring a notepad this time. She walked down the hallway, knowing exactly what this was. The probationary hold was over. The metrics had been tallied. When she entered, the office was already half empty. The blueprints were gone. The personal items, what few there were, had been packed. Ethan was standing by the window, buttoning his coat. A black suitcase stood by the door, an echo of the one he had packed in their apartment 5 years ago, though this one was leather and carried the weight of an empire, not a fugitive. "Sit," Ethan said, gesturing to the chair. He didn't sit. He walked to the desk and picked up a thick white envelope. He slid it across the mahogany surface until it rested in front of her. "The restructuring is finalized, he said, his voice even. "I've appointed a new director of communications. She starts Monday. She's young, hungry, and understands digital metrics in a way your department simply doesn't." Elena looked at the envelope. She didn't reach for it. "So I'm fired." "You're being made redundant," Ethan corrected. "There is a difference." He tapped the envelope. "Inside is a severance package, 6 months of full salary, plus health coverage for the remainder of the year. It's double the standard industry requirement. I signed off on it personally." Elena felt a lump form in her throat, hot and sharp. "Why?" she whispered. "If I'm just a line item, why be generous?" "Because Aura takes care of its liabilities before discarding them," Ethan said. "And because I don't want you to starve. I just don't want you here." He checked his watch. "My flight to Tokyo leaves in 2 hours. The acquisition team will handle things from here." He walked around the desk, picking up his briefcase. He stopped a few feet from her. For a moment, just a fleeting second, the air between them grew heavy with the ghosts of everything they had promised each other at the altar. "Ethan," she said, standing up,
She didn't know what she wanted to say. Thank you. I'm sorry. I love you. None of it fit. Take the money, Elena, he said softly. Buy yourself some time. Figure out who you are when you're not trying to be someone else's wife or someone else's executive. He didn't offer his hand. He didn't say goodbye. He simply walked past her, the movement creating a small draft of air that smelled of expensive soap and cold detachment. Elena heard the door click shut behind him. She picked up the envelope. It was heavy. She opened it. The check inside was for a staggering amount, enough to pay off her debts, enough to start over. It was a fortune. It was the rich life she had screamed for 5 years ago. But as she held it, she realized it wasn't a gift. It was a receipt. He had paid her off. He had settled the account of their marriage with a check, proving once and for all that she was something that could be bought, while he was something that could not be kept. She walked to the window. Down on the street, the black town car was waiting. She watched Ethan emerge from the building. The driver opened the door. Ethan didn't look up. He didn't scan the windows searching for her face. He slid into the dark interior, and the car pulled away, merging seamlessly into the stream of traffic heading toward the horizon, toward Tokyo, toward a future that had no space for her. Elena Vance stood alone in the high-rise office, clutching a check that solved all her problems and cured none of her pain. She looked out at the Chicago skyline, the steel, the glass, the concrete. It was beautiful, cold, and utterly indifferent. She had wanted a man who owned the skyline. Now she knew. The only thing harder than living without him was living in the world he built, knowing she was just a spectator on the ground,